Hi guys, only me again. So welcome to another metal detecting video. So actually we're not going to be doing too much metal detecting today, although we are in a nicely fresh ploughed field. Today's video is going to be slightly different. So what I've decided to do is try and make a video where we go through using the XP Deus, which is the metal detecting machine that I use, and try and make a custom program together. And I'll show you sort of the different settings that are available to the Deus and how they can be used to customize the machine to your particular land and the things that you want to find. So as you can see, it's being ploughed up today, so it might be a little bit noisy in the background, but there's not a lot I can do about that. He's kind enough to let me go on his field, so the best I can do is obviously accommodate him. But yeah, we are going to just be doing a custom program, and then if I get time today, it's quite a nice day. It's a bank holiday weekend, by the way, so it's Good Friday. But yeah, if I get time, we're going to try and test the program out in this field and just sort of see what we're getting from it really, and see how we go from there. So yeah, it's a slightly different video, guys, slightly different to my usual thing, but hopefully somebody will find some information on here that they'll, you know, be able to take on board. I've got the manual with me, so we can go through all of the different settings that are on the Deus and try and figure out what they do together. I do make custom programs, so I'm more familiar with them, but you know, mainly this is the process that I use if I was going to go into a new permission and set up my machine from scratch. It might be a bit more thorough and a bit more long-winded, but this is certainly what I would do in order to make sure that my machine's getting to the correct depth and it's also picking up the correct things from the ground. So without further ado, it might be a long video, this one. I'll try and make it as short as possible, but hopefully what we'll do is show you the targets that I've got. Brought some test targets. We'll dig them in a hole and we'll start making a custom program together. So again, thank you very much for watching, guys, and yeah, let's get cracking. Okay guys, so as I said before, we're going to make a custom program today, and this is roughly the sort of process that I use when I come into the field to set up my machine to get it at the most optimal level possible, using the different tweaks and settings that are available to us. I know a lot of you guys are happy using the factory presets, and I've got no problem with that whatsoever. I use factory presets. Everybody uses factory presets to a degree, because even a custom program is a factory preset. It's just tweaked slightly with different settings here and there, just so it works the very best it can on the type of ground that you're detecting in. Okay, so the idea today is I've got 8 targets. I've got a possible 9th target, which is a piece of coke, but I don't know whether or not to use that or not yet, and if I do, probably be on the surface anyway, because coke sounds like coke regardless of sort of where you put it. But we are going to be doing depth testing today, so we're going to be digging the holes and putting the targets in the hole, and they're all going to be at the same depth. Okay, so I've brought this little ruler. This is a 16 centimeter ruler. All right, so it's not incredibly long, and it certainly won't be incredibly deep, but that will be deep enough for me to gauge whether or not I am getting the correct depth using the different targets that we're going to be using. So the idea is I'm now going to be digging 8 holes, and they're all going to be in a ground that I've tested to make sure that there's no metal in the ground. So no iron, grouchy bits, no signals, nothing. The ground is quiet, and as you can see, it's just being rolled now. So it's been ploughed and it's being rolled, it's compressed, it's dry. It's pretty ideal ground, to be honest with you, to be testing in, especially if you do a lot of metal detecting in ploughed soil. But again, there's no reason why you can't do this type of test in a pasture field where there's grass and you dig a lot of holes and you make them all the same depth. So it's the same principle, it's just that we're in a pasture field, it's just been rolled, and that's kind of where we're going to be detecting today. Alright, so 8 holes, all the same depth as this ruler. So the bottom of the hole here, the top of the hole here. Alright, so I'm going to do that now, try and film it. Might have to speed it up a bit, otherwise it's going to be incredibly boring. But yeah, we'll do that now and then we'll show you the targets. See you in a bit. Okay guys, so as you can see, I've got 8 holes, 1 for each target. They are all pretty much the same sort of depth. You're never going to get it exactly right, but you know, I've got my ruler, 16 centimeters, and it pretty much never comes, you know, over or under the top. So that's what you're looking at. Another thing is when you're digging the holes, when you finish digging the hole and you've got the right level, just make sure you compress it down on the bottom, because otherwise the ground will be loose, and when the ground's loose you do lose a lot of depth and it can give you false readings. So when I fill the holes back up, once I've put the targets in there, I'm going to try and make sure that I push it down as hard as possible, just so that there isn't the sort of aeration going through the soil and the gaps and the rocks and things. I want it to be really compressed as much as possible, but obviously at that same depth. Okay? So 8 holes, 8 targets. I'm going to show you the targets now and then we'll put them in the holes, label them up, and we'll start making the program. Okay, so we've got the very first target here. Number 1 is going to be a ring pull. Alright, so these things sound good. Doesn't matter what factory preset you're on, this is always going to sound good. This is one of the older types as well, so it's one of those ones that really do sound good and they're really hard to avoid. So I've picked that one specifically for this test so that you can kind of get an idea as to how it sounds like under the different settings, and then we can decide later whether or not we want to dig it. So number 1 is a ring pull. Number 2 is a gold ring. Okay, so this is an 18 carat gold ring. If you have watched my videos before, you'll have noticed that I found this one in one of my previous videos. So it's a really nice quality ring, certainly the sort of thing you want to be finding no matter what ground you're in. So yeah, 18 carat gold ring, number 2. So number 3 is a little tiny Roman grot. Don't know if you can see it in there, but yeah, it's just a little tiny Roman coin. Again, definitely something you want to be digging, so we want to see what it sounds like in the ground and see if we can, you know, get the most out of the machine to find as many of these as we can. So that's number 3. Number 4 is a tiny little hammered coin. This is one of the smallest hammered coins I've ever found. It's a little medieval coin. I think it's a lot smaller than a penny. I can't quite remember the denomination off the top of my head, but it is tiny. If you're finding this at depth, then trust me, you are going to be finding a lot of stuff that you want to be digging. Alright, so that's why I've brought this one for the test. Tiny little hammered coin. Let's see what number 5 is. Okay, so number 5 is a hammered coin next to an old rusty iron nail. Now, I've put these two together because you're always going to find a hammered coin. If it's at the same depth as that tiny little hammered coin that we had before, then you're obviously going to find that because it's bigger. It's made of silver, it's the same metal, but it's bigger, it's far more conductive. Your machine's going to pick it up. What we want to know is your coin going to pick up, your machine going to pick up this coin when it's next to an old rusty iron nail? So that's this test, that's number 5. Let's move on to number 6. Okay, so number 6 is a tiny little musket ball. This is actually a pistol shot ball, and again it's for the same reasons. It's made of lead, so it's a different conductivity to all the other targets that we're going to be burying, but it's a slightly smaller variant of, say, a musket ball or a piece of lead that might be a relic or something like that. And again, the smaller your target is, the deeper you're picking it up and the clearer it is, then chances are you're going to be digging all of the other stuff as well. So I've picked the smallest, most difficult targets to get, yeah, that's number 6. Let's move on. Okay, so now we're moving on to the good stuff. This here is a big old lump of foil. Okay, this is just your standard foil. What I've done is I've squashed it as much as possible, because generally when you find foil in a field, it's been squashed and compressed as much as possible. That's a target that we want to be looking at, and we certainly want to know what it sounds like and how deep we can pick it up. So that's probably a good couple of inches, that piece of foil, completely squashed. That's going to be our 7th target. Let's move on to number 8. Okay, so the very last target. Can you see how small that is? Now you're probably thinking, that's another hammered coin. But it's not. It's actually a very, very small piece of tin foil. And the reason I've selected this is because you know, this could be one of those signals that you certainly go, wow, this is going to be great, and I'm going to dig it, and then you pick it up and it's a piece of tin foil. Or it can be one of those targets that's scattered all around the field and it gives you those false readings. So I wanted to try and minimise how much you know, I dig these false signals, or at least be able to recognise what they are, and by the tones alone be able to identify whether or not it's possibly something big, whether it's something small, or whether or not it's in the foil range. So that is target number 8. So all 8 targets now. We've got all them all. We're going to put them in the holes by the same order that I've just introduced them to you, and then I'm going to cover them up. So again, I'm going to speed this bit up, guys, because you know, I don't want you falling asleep. And yeah, I'll come back to you once I've done that. See you in a bit. Okay guys, so as you can see, we've buried all 8 targets now, and let's just go through them one by one just so we know which one are which. So this one here is the ring pull, a couple of feet to the left. This one here is the gold ring. This one here is the Roman grot. And this one is the tiny hammered coin. This one is the hammered coin next to the rusty nail. And this one here is the musket ball, or pistol shot ball. This one here is the big foil. And this one here next to the spade, which I'll move in a minute, is that tiny, tiny piece of foil. Okay, so there's all 8 targets, nicely spaced. I've compressed them down as much as I can, but it should be fine just for testing, so I'm not too worried about it. I think we're going to get some good results today. And yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. So what I'm going to do now is grab my detector, and I'll go for a couple of little bits on it with you, just so you know what I'm using and how I'm going to set it up, and then we'll get cracking and making this program. So see you in a bit. Okay guys, so as you can see, I've got my equipment. I'm not going to need my headphones for this test, because obviously I want you guys to be able to hear the signals as well. So we're going to be using the mic in the actual remote itself. And today I'm going to be using the 11-inch coil. So the reason I'm using the 11-inch coil is because personally I think it is the happy medium. It's small enough, you know, to work in and around stubble and woodlands and stuff like that. Obviously it's not going to be as good as the 9-inch coil, because that's why it was designed. It's a smaller coil, it's much better for getting into those difficult areas, but it's obviously a bit better than the 13-inch coil, which I've never really got on with. I did buy it when it came out, and I sold it quite soon afterwards because I never used it. I never found the use for it, and yeah, I know, you know, you're going to get more depth and things like that, but for me it's always the 11-inch coil. I just find it to be the best one. It's the happy medium. So this is actually the standard coil. This is the original 11-inch coil, so it's not the X35, and obviously it's not the high frequency. I'm happy with that. I've got an X35 9-inch coil, but to be honest, I rarely use anything more than 18 kilohertz anyway. So you know, I'm not going to upgrade a coil simply because I'm going to get a few more extra settings just for the frequency. That's the only difference. The coils themselves are actually exactly the same construction, they just have different chips inside of them which enable them to switch to different frequencies. So yeah, that's why we're using that one today. Standard 11-inch coil, and obviously we've got the remote. Alright, so we're going to turn on the remote and let you guys see. So I am running version 4.1, which I know has disappeared now, but it's a slightly older version. I'm happy with it. I'm one of those people that just think if it's not broken, don't fix it. If I did want to tune in my 9-inch X35 coil, then obviously I'd have to revert up again to the other newer program, but obviously I'm not, so I'm just going to be using the old one. I've found so much with this one, it feels to me like the old faithful, and I just really don't want to upgrade it, so that's why I'm using this one. If you're thinking, well, I've got 5.4 or something like that and I've got an X35 coil, this premise is exactly the same. It's not going to make any difference, okay? The only difference is you can change your frequencies, which can change the way that this particular test might work. But my advice to you is stick to 18 kilohertz even if you've got the X35 coil, and once you've kind of tweaked a few of the settings to get the depth and things like that, then try different frequencies and see if you can pierce a little bit more. The benefit with frequencies is that the higher the frequency, you actually do find smaller targets, and you can, you know, inkle out sort of targets between iron and coke and things like that. But the problem is that you end up picking up everything that's small. So if you're in fields that are littered with I don't know, lead shot or just general waste, general noisy fields, they could be, you know, a lot of coke in the fields, it could just be the mineralisation of where you are. Then higher frequency, although it will find you the very small targets, it's also going to make it very, very noisy and unstable, so it could become quite erratic. So that's the only downside to the high frequencies. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got the lower frequencies, which technically how frequencies work is that it's a much slower pulse into the ground, therefore it should penetrate a lot deeper. And technically it does. I mean, it certainly doesn't go, you know, silly deep, but it certainly does make a difference in terms of depth. But the only problem there is it's going to be much difficult to differentiate between smaller targets that are next to bigger targets, especially ferrous targets, so like iron. And obviously there's an element of that you might miss the smaller targets altogether, especially if you go down to something like 3 kilohertz. Then yeah, you're going to be hitting deep, and you're certainly going to be looking for those big old wadges of metal that are buried deep in the ground. But you know, you do run the risk of missing the tiny cut quarters and the hammered and all those sorts of things that are just lying relatively scattered around that particular target, because it can't do it all. So when I try and make a program, I try and make a program that's a sort of happy medium. Yeah, you know, I could go for the deepest one, and that's great, I'd find everything, but then I don't want to, you know, miss smaller targets, and I want to be able to hear the difference between big iron and rubbish signals. So yeah, I try and make it so that it kind of works for me and how I like to metal detect, and that's pretty much what we're going to be doing today. But feel free to, you know, change all of this. If you want to copy the setting we make today, then great, you know, go for it. But bear in mind that it's set up for this type of soil, which is a very, very dry ploughed soil. I mean, we're pretty much into summertime here in the UK now, so yeah, it's going to be getting drier and drier and drier. But the premise is there, and obviously, you know, I'll give it a test in maybe a part 2 of this video, and we'll see what we come up with. But again, you know, don't think, well, I can't use this program because it's set up for this field. It's very much like a base program, like a factory preset program. You can use them anywhere. Some of them might just need tweaking, and you certainly might just need to adjust your ground balance. Okay, so that's the equipment we're using. Let's move on to the next one. Okay guys, so let's get cracking making this program. So I've got the manual here so we can go through all of the different presets and just roughly kind of figure out what they do, as well as some of the expert settings. But the very first thing I do when I'm making a program is I try and run through every factory preset there is to find out which one's working the best for my particular area. So each of the factory programs have very different settings. They also have different filter settings which are hidden in the programming behind the actual customizations that we can do as well. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to run through the 9 presets and just see which one is coming up best for all of our 8 targets. Let's do that and see what we come up with. Okay guys, so let's start with basic and we'll just run through all the targets on that, see what they sound like. So this is the ring pull. It's there, but it's not great. Let's move on to the ring. Yep, definitely picking the ring up nice and clear. Roman coin. It's there, it's a nice clean signal. It's not consistent, but it's definitely there. Let's move on to the tiny little hammered coin. Yep, you're going to miss that one, I think. Very easy to miss that one. Now let's move on to the hammered next to the nail. Okay, so even number 1 basics picking up that hammered, not really picking up much iron, so that's pretty good. Let's move on to the musket ball. Yep, not getting the musket ball at all. Nothing there at all. Okay, let's move on to the big foil. Yeah, nice and clear. It's ringing through at about, what's that, about, well, 80s. Let's try the little foil. Yep, absolutely nothing on the little foil. Such a small piece of foil that it would be quite difficult to pick up on any machine. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through each of the settings and do that, and then I'm going to get back to you. So I will let you know which one I think's the best and we'll move on making the preset from there. Catch you in a minute. Okay guys, so just a very quick update. I'm running through the programs now. I'm on number 5, which is G-Max. Works great on the ring pull. Works great on the little Roman coin, although a little bit inconsistent. When I get to the tiny hammered, nothing. Not picking it up at all. And that, I haven't changed any of the settings, that's just as is number 5 G-Max. So, won't be using that one. Let's move on, see what else we can get. Okay guys, so I've run through all of the factory preset settings and I've come to the conclusion that the one that's the most stable between all of the targets and does pick up the tiny little hammered is number 2, Gold Max Power. It doesn't surprise me because that's pretty much the base program I use for most of my custom presets, but for me personally and in this test, that was the preset that worked the most efficiently. Okay, so now what we're going to do is try and begin to go through some of the settings to try and figure out what we can do to try and pick up some of these other targets that were a little bit more inconsistent and were probably a little bit faint or a bit buzzy, and try and get the absolute most out of them. Alright, so if we go into the menu and you can see the first one it gives you is Discrimination. Now, I'm sure you guys know what Discrimination does, and I don't really want to be going into too much depth on some of these settings, but essentially, you know, what this is telling you is that when you run over a target and it pops up with a number up here, so for instance it could say 67, alright, if your Discrimination was set to 67 here, then it would pick that up, but if it was set to 66, then it wouldn't come up. It would come up as like a really low, buzzy high tone. Or low tone, sorry, and you set that tone, you decide what that 68 tone sounds like by going into the expert menu and coming up here with your different pitch tones and then your segments here. That's how you decide what sounds like what, depending on what sort of number it comes up as. Okay, so I'm not going to mess around with that too much at the moment, because what I tend to do is I have certain tones that I use with every setting. So even if I use a factory preset, I change the tones to the same tones that I'm used to hearing, and I try and copy those across to every preset that I make, whether it's custom or whatever, I just try and copy them across, and it's so that I'm not getting confused when I switch settings as to what sounds good and what what doesn't. So what I'm going to do is just copy the same ones across as what I always do, but I'm not going to do that just yet. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to move down to sensitivity. Now on the Gold Max Power number 2 preset, it's set to 90 as its sort of, you know, sensitivity preset value. Now sensitivity isn't depth, it isn't machine power. All it does is it decides how sensitive the coil is going over certain targets. Now this might be useful if you're running over, let's say, a hammered coin next to a nail, because it's likely to pick up those signals a lot more and faster if they're right next to each other, because it's a far more sensitive frequency or far more sensitive power that the coil is running at. The problem is that if you turn it all the way up to, let's say, 99, which is the highest value it goes to, then you're going to be picking up possibly a lot of EMI frequencies. You're going to be picking up every single little noise in the ground, and if you've ever, you know, accidentally knocked your coil on a rock or a little turfy bit of grass, then it sounds off as well. So it can be a little bit annoying because it can give you false signals. And what I try and do is try and find a happy medium where I can get the most sensitivity as possible, but with the machine being as stable as possible. So what I'm going to do now is run over each target, playing around with the sensitivity until I think that I'm getting the most out of the sensitivity, but it's not too noisy. What I would say is that some ground will allow you to use 99, some ground will allow you to use 76. It all depends on where you are, and it all depends on the type of ground you're detecting in. So this is why it's important to sort of adjust this before you start detecting and you go in the field, because, you know, all these little adjustments are going to give you that absolute confidence in your machine that if you're walking over something, you're going to have that confidence. Alright? So I'm going to change that now, running over the targets, and I'll let you know what we land on. Okay guys, so I've adjusted the sensitivity to what I think is the most optimal, bearing in mind I'd focused a little bit more on the hammered coin next to the nail, and also the tiny hammered and stuff like that, just to see if it made a difference. And I've landed on the number of 96. I'm able to use that sort of higher sensitivity here because it's really in the middle of nowhere. There's no power lines or, you know, many houses or anything really, so I'm able to really boost up that sensitivity without it being too much of a problem. So the next setting that we need to have a look at while we're in here is the expert setting. So the expert of the sensitivity is TX power. Now in the manual it says Deus enables you to adjust the strength of the emitted electromagnetic field according to 3 levels, 1 to 3. By default the power is set to level 2, which offers a very dependable performance level that is largely sufficient in most cases. The power only has a subtle effect on the device's pure performance with regards to sensitivity. However, it increases your detector's power consumption as well as alter its stability in difficult ground. Yeah, so essentially what they're saying there is that the higher TX power that you use, the more power is going to be pumped into your coil. But what they're saying is that it's not going to make too much difference in terms of depth, and it's only very subtle. So again, I would imagine that this would come into force more so if you were in an area where there was a population, electromagnetic interference. I mean, if you were around, say, electric fences and power lines, then again you might suffer a little bit with this one because of the amount of power it's pumping into the coil. So you've got to kind of decide, do I want all the power in the world, or do I want enough power to give me good depth, but also make the machine stable? And that's all the TX power is really doing. So what I'm going to do is just play around with the TX power values on each of the targets, and then I'll let you know what I decide on. Okay guys, so I've adjusted that. I've gone over each target using the TX power, and to be honest with you, I didn't notice much difference with regards to the targets. It certainly didn't make any of them louder or brighter or change their tone in any way. I mean, I was kind of umming and ahhing to go between 1 and 2, bearing in mind if you go for 1 you're going to have a little bit better battery power, but the manual says that 2 is probably the best one, and offers the very most dependable performance level that is largely sufficient in most areas. So do you know what, I'm just going to go with that. Didn't really notice much difference on the target, so let's stick with that. Okay, so next up is frequency. So as I said before, I'm using the standard 11-inch coil. Highest I can go is to 18 kilohertz, and to be fair, I'm quite happy with 18 kilohertz, so I'm not really going to adjust that. I did a bit of explaining earlier on in the video with regards to frequency, so I don't really want to go over the same ground again, but I'm going to stick with 17.4, which is essentially 18 kilohertz. I'm going to keep it in the middle there, because that in the middle is the setting that XP have tested this on the most. The only reason that you would adjust it left or right from the expert setting in the frequency range is if you are on a club dig and you're getting feedback from other people's detectors, because they're using 17.4 kilohertz as well. But bearing in mind that XP haven't tested it on the other frequencies as much as they have with 17.4, so that is what they say to use, because that is what they have tested it, and that should give you the most accurate VDI numbers and target identification. Let's move on to the next one. So, iron volume. Iron volume, yeah, do you know what? It's always nice to hear what's in the ground. Some people say they don't want to hear it at all, so they notch it out completely. But to be honest with you, I personally like to hear a bit of iron, because I know, for instance, if there was a building here, because there's iron in the ground, nails, stakes, those sorts of things. Or I know, for instance, you know, if it's a hot piece of land, so where I am detecting, essentially there has been occupation or activity of some degree. This might come into play on my targets a little bit more with the hammered coin that's next to a nail. So I'm going to play around with it a little bit, guys, and just let you know what I think is the most optimal setting, and I'll get back to you. Okay, so I'm just playing around with the iron volume settings on the detector. Quite interesting results on the target, which is the hammered coin next to the nail. Now, I'm going to leave the iron volume on 3, which is what the factory preset for Gold Max Power was set to, and have a listen. It's actually picking up the nail more so than it is the hammered. So what I'm going to do is adjust it down to 1 and try again. Now, although it's a little inconsistent, what it's actually doing is it's hiding the nail and trying to push through that higher frequency, so the higher tone target of the hammered. So what I'm going to do is push it all the way down to 0 and try it. So it is inconsistent, but it's certainly hiding that iron nail. And now I'm going to push it all the way up to the maximum of 5 and see what it's like. And that's quite interesting, because even on 5, it's allowing that iron signal to come through, but it's also allowing the hammered coin to come through as well. So I'm just going to adjust it live now and just see if we can get a happy medium here. So I'm going to go down to 4. Going to go to 3, going to go to 2. See, on 2 it does become a bit scratchy. So do you know what, guys, I'm probably going to leave it on 3. I just think, yeah, that works quite well. It's a happy medium, it's letting me know iron's there, but it's also pushing through that hammered signal as well. So that's iron volume on 3, there's no expert for that one. Let's move on to the next one. Okay guys, so the next setting that we have to change here is reactivity. Now, as you can see, reactivity is preset to 2 on the Gold Max. So we're going to try and change this and play around with it and just see what we can get as the most optimal setting for our piece of land. It's important for me at this stage to probably say that reactivity is probably one of the most important things I change when I go onto a specific site. And that's because it can really make a difference in terms of depth and also target perception. So if you're not really too sure what reactivity does, Basically, I'll refer to the manual. It says the reactivity is a vital setting that determines the detector's performance in terms of how quickly it analyses the signal from detected objects and its ability to separate the signals from two targets located close together. This is also known as recovery time. If the soil contains a great deal of iron, hot rocks or other mineralised debris, soil penetration is generally reduced. In these conditions, Deus enables you to select a high degree of reactivity which will help you speed up the analysis of signals. On the other hand, if the ground is clean, it is better to reduce the reactivity and sweep more slowly in order to be more sensitive to deep masses and obtain more through penetration. So essentially what it is it will boost the depth that your machine can go to, but it will also reduce the target identification that it sees. So that's quite a tricky one, isn't it? Because really what you want is maximum depth, maximum target identification. But the problem is that if you go down to say something like, you know, reactivity -1, did it go to -1? No, just going to 0. If you go down to 0, then essentially what that's telling you is that anything that's sort of large in the ground, you're going to pick it up and you're going to hear it a lot clearer than if you would if it was higher. But you're not going to be able to identify sort of smaller targets and things like that. And it does obviously mean that if the ground is mineralised, so if you're walking along and it's quite a noisy field and you're getting odd little signals here, there and everywhere, that reactivity 0 is probably not what you want to be using, even though you're going to get the most amount of depth from it. So you have to basically walk the field a couple of times and just adjust the reactivity according to where you're detecting. And this goes to, even if you're using a preset, even if you're on a factory preset, adjust the reactivity every time you go in the field. Even if it's just 1 or 2, you might even just leave it exactly where it is, but it's worth doing, because if you don't, you could potentially be missing some of the deeper targets, and if your field or your ground or your site or permission is a very quiet one in the middle of nowhere, then chances are you can bump your reactivity up quite a lot, which in my personal opinion gives you a lot more depth. It changes the program you're using dramatically, so it's worth changing this one. Alright, so we're going to edit it a little bit now across the 8 targets that we've got, and I'm just going to let you know what I think the best reactivity is for this site, and I'll let you know the results. Okay guys, so I'm just adjusting the reactivity. A good target to demonstrate how this works is probably the hammered next to the nail. And have a listen to this, it's quite dramatic results. So at the moment I've got it set to reactivity 1, don't know if you can see that. I think that's working quite well on this site, so have a listen. Okay, so that is the hammered next to the nail. Now I'm going to move the reactivity up by 1, so it's reactivity 2. Still not too bad. Let's go to 2.5. Let's go to 3. And let's go to 4. As you start moving up, it starts to fade out. It doesn't become as clear, so you can tell that it's really affecting the depth. And obviously the iron field that's coming through from that nail is just overcoming that object slightly. So from that point I'm going to move back down through my reactivity until I get to a point where it's a happy medium. So let's move back down, 2.5 now, 2. See, even at 1 now, it's picking up that iron nail more so than the actual hammered coin. So let's just go down to 0. On 0, might as well be no hammered coin there at all. That's just picking up the iron nail. So let's go back up to 2. I think for me personally on this site, number 2 works the best. So I'm going to stick it at 2 and move on to the expert setting. Okay, so the expert setting next that we need to have a look at is from the reactivity menu. So just push expert and you open up the silencer. Now, what's the silencer? Okay, let's see what the manual says and then we'll get a better understanding. So, it says, a few large iron objects of unusual shapes are often more difficult to discriminate. Often iron objects generate a few audible remnants of broken or inconsistent signals, crackling. When you increase the silencer, you are applying a filter which eliminates the crackling caused by ferrous. Level 2 represents a good compromise, but if you have difficulty to distinguish bottle caps, use level 4. Okay, so essentially, we've all been in the field detecting and we get a signal and we think, well, it sounds nice, but it's a little bit crackly. Now, obviously, what the silencer is going to do is eliminate that crackle from that particular target because it suspects that it could be ferrous. Now that's obviously quite good because it eliminates the bad targets that you might dig, but it also might be quite bad, and we've got to be quite careful here because what we don't want to do is, you know, boost it so high that it lets everything through, or notch it so low that of course we don't hear them at all, because we want to distinguish the difference between the ferrous targets and the non-ferrous targets. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run over my targets and just see how this reacts and see what the optimal setting is. Usually when I make a program I leave this on 2 because that does seem to be the optimal setting, but I know that some people use this on -1 and they really go to town on it, but it all depends on where you are, guys. Let's play around with it, see what we can get on our 8 targets, and then we'll go from there. Okay guys, so I've had a play around with it. I think 1's pretty good for where I am today. I'm not really noticing too much different, especially with the hammer next to the nail, but I think this is really going to come into effect when you come across the big iron signals like the, you know, the old plough parts and maybe a cannonball or something like that. Big iron's always very difficult to discriminate with a machine because the bigger the signal, it's obviously going to be a much more condensed type of signal that it gives, so it's always going to sound relatively good. And I do kind of really want to hear those little crackly bits because I want to be able to tell the difference between something like a big iron and a smaller target. So I'm quite happy to leave this on 1. If I come across a big iron I might adjust it and see what it sounds like, but I think 1 or 2 here and you're pretty much good to go. Not really too much point in adjusting this one for this particular setting, so let's move on to the next one. Okay, so the next setting in the menu is audio response. Now, what audio response essentially does is it makes those very faint, deep, weak targets sound much cleaner, nicer, and a little bit like they're more closer to the ground. However, the downside of that is that obviously you're not going to get a good perception of depth. So you have to find a happy medium with audio response, because if you want to hear those really faint, deep signals, you've got to ramp it up a bit. But it obviously means that anything close to the top is going to be loud, and it also means that you're not really going to be too sure how deep those targets are. But of course you're not going to miss anything. I like to keep it on 3 or 4, but you can adjust this however you feel that you might want to do it, and I'm just going to try it on my targets now and just see what the best I can get from it is and let you guys know. Okay guys, so I've had to switch to my phone, so unfortunately I've been waffling so much that the battery on my camera's died already and I didn't bring my spare, so I'm back on my phone now. But anyway, where were we? We're in audio response. I've run through the targets. I've come up with number 4. Now number 4 means that the deep targets, the small deep targets, are going to be quite loud. But on the ground that I'm detecting on, which is freshly ploughed, lots of rocks, lots of airy bits in the soil, it's not going to be as compressed as what I like. I'm quite happy with that, and it did sound really good over the tiny hammered coin. It was able to pick it up really nicely and ping it through well. I didn't notice much difference between 4 and 5. So I stuck with number 4 because obviously I'd like to have a little bit of depth perception just so I know how far to dig down in the ground. So I'm happy with number 4, going to leave it at that and move on to the expert setting. Now in the expert setting of the audio response, you can see it's got audio overload. Now audio overload doesn't really do too much. All it does is change the type of sound the detector makes when it runs over something that's a really big target in the ground. So we've all been over those targets where your detector sounds like a little video game. It sort of does a little noise that's a little bit strange, but it's letting you know that there's something absolutely huge in the ground. It's generally quite close to the surface. And all this does is decide that particular sound and how prevalent you want it within your detecting. I always leave mine at number 1. I'm so familiar with that little noise now, but it's very rarely I come across a target that gives me that signal anyway. But yeah, my advice to you guys is just to leave it on 1. It's not going to give you any benefits in terms of where you're detecting, depth, target perception, anything like that. It's just the type of noise and how loud that particular noise is when you get close to those really big targets. So we're going to leave that one on that one and move on to the next setting. Okay, so the next setting is notch. Now, notch essentially is a type of discrimination. The reason why it's different to normal discrimination is because you can actually discriminate a certain segment in between a target value. So what that means is that, let's say for instance you don't want to discriminate targets anything 66 and below, because although most coins and good stuff will ring higher than 66, there's going to be a chance that you might come across a very small hammered or a cut quarter or just something very small and thin that will actually be something you want to find but will come up in a much higher, lower sort of segment. Well, you're going along the field, you want to find those things, but you're also finding lots of tin foil that are coming up in between that particular type of VDI number and the above 66 number. So what you can do is, let's say you're walking along and there are ring pulls everywhere. The ring pulls are all ringing up at say 57, between 57 and 61. Every single ring pull you get, you dig in loads of them and they're all between those numbers. What you can do is you can actually set your detector between 57 and 61 and it will notch that out completely. So you will be walking along the field and any of the numbers that pop up here, if they're between 57 and 61, they won't even come through on your detector, or you can decide what type of noise that makes. But that's all it does. It's a sort of very customizable notch setting, and it's not really recommended to change because targets can really vary their VDI numbers, and you know, you could actually miss something between 57 and 61 just thinking that it's all ring pulls. But XP have given you that setting for very special circumstances in certain areas where you think that might be a benefit to you. I don't use it, but you know, it's certainly there and it's an option for you if you want to use it. That's pretty much all it does, guys. I'm not going to go into too much about that one, and obviously now we are back to discrimination. All right, so I'm going to go into a little bit of depth about discrimination, not too much, but I'm going to try and set it up with the tones that I like and explain why I like them. And then we've pretty much got our program. The only thing we're going to need to do is a bit of ground balancing on the machine. Really important to do this every time you go into a field. Even if you've been in that field before, just make sure you're not running too high a ground balance and the machine's not getting too much interference from the soil. And we're good to go. We've got a program, we've got half the day ahead of us, a nice big ploughed field, and we are going to be confident that our machine's going to be picking up some good targets within the ranges that we've set, and hopefully we're going to get some good finds. So let's go into discrimination. Okay guys, so we've done the program so far. The last thing I was going to do is just run through the discrimination expert settings with you. So just go back into discrimination. As you can see, it's set to 6.1 on program 2, which is the gold max power. So let's just go into the expert settings. And you can see that it's set to 3 tones. I don't mind using 3 tones at all. I think it's a pretty good setting. I mainly try and use 4 tones, but the only difference is there's just going to be a slightly different pitch, which will tell you hopefully what a different metal might sound like in the ground. So I suppose the way you could look at 3 tones is that you could say you could give iron 1 tone, lead another tone, and then sort of high conductive metals like gold, silver, copper another tone. So you're giving each of your metals a tone, and then anything in between is just a sort of mishmash and let's dig it and let's see. That's kind of how I look at the tones. And then if you go into the expert menu, you can really then sort of decide what those tones sound like to your ear. So this is very much a personal preference, but you've got the 3 on the side here. Now 202 is a very low grunty iron buzz. It's that sort of low tone that you get when you run over like a nail or something like that. Gold Max is set the middle one to 580, and that's a very sort of middle tone. It's like a bip bip bip, quite nice, just letting you know that there's something within those ranges of 6.1 and up to 7.6 on the VDI numbers that are going to give you that type of tone of 518. And then you've got the highest tone here on the Gold Max, which is 644, and that's anything 76 and above. So if you run something 76 over the coil, it's going to come up with a tone value of 644, and that's essentially just how high pitched the tone is. All the way on 99, it's like a very nip 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 high pitched tone. So this is kind of up to you how you want to train your ear and what sounds right to you. The three tones that I always use are 202 for my iron. I use 541 for my sort of mid tones, so that could be anything like sort of buckles or lead musket balls or anything like that. And then my highest tone, I use a very high pitch tone, which is of about 930, and I've trained my ear to those tones. And as I say, I pretty much program those tones into every setting, whether it's a preset or whether it's a custom preset that I make. When I go into a field, I train my ear to those types of tones, and it just means then that when I'm changing between each program, I might be getting different, I don't know, reactivity settings or different filter settings going on behind the scenes, but the tones are always sounding the same, and that's building my confidence with the machine, and it's giving me a little bit more sort of freedom to kind of go out and change everything I need to, but not actually completely change the tones, because I don't want to get myself confused with, well, you know, that sounds like a good tone or that sounds like a bad tone. If you always stick to the same tones, then you'll get a good general idea as to, you know, what sounds good and what sounds bad. So yeah, that's pretty much how I'm going to set the tones up at the moment. Now all we need to do is look at VDI numbers and how they correspond with these tones. So this is going to be a bit of a live one in the field. I've gone ahead and dug up all of those targets, and I've put them on the surface this time in a line, because we don't need them in the ground anymore. We've done the depth testing and the tweaking and stuff like that. So on the surface is fine. All we need to do is find out what they come in as, and then we can adjust it and go from there. So let's go and do that, guys, and then we'll adjust this one and move on to the ground balance. Okay, let's get cracking. So we're going to go over the musket bore first of all, which is the little pistol shot bore. And it might help if I turn my speaker on. Let's just do that for you now. Speaker on, yep, cool. Okay, over the musket bore. You're going to have to live with my shadow, I'm afraid, but we don't need to see what's on the ground. We just need to see the VDI numbers. So that's coming in at around 57-ish, okay? And then we'll move on to the hammered next to the nail. You can hear that's a slightly higher pitch. It's kind of all over the place, but yeah, it's coming in at around 98, 99. And then we're going to move on to the tiny foil. And that's about, well, it's coming in at about 32 to 37, something like that. And then we've got the gold ring. That's coming in at a sort of 51, 52, 53 kind of VDI. That's the ring pull coming in at 72, 73. The little Roman grot. Really nice high pitched tone on that one. And that's 80 to 81. And then we've got the big foil, which is 67. And then we've got 61, which is the tiny little hammered coin. So if you were to adjust your discrimination based on those VDI numbers, you could pretty much say to yourself that anything below 51, you pretty much don't want to dig, because you've got all the pretty good stuff here, and it's all quite small stuff. But it's all coming in higher than 51. The problem is, if you discriminate from 51, so that anything below 51 is a sort of grunty iron buzz, you're going to have an issue like this. So I'm going to run over the hammered coin, which is that tiny little hammered coin again. and it's coming in at 61 to 66. Now what happens if that coin is deeper? So let's raise the coil and go over it again. There's still a signal there, but it's coming in. It's coming in at about, well, it was bouncing between 26, 44, 56. And that's the problem that you've got, is that if you really want to discriminate those sorts of levels, you are going to miss some good stuff, because, you know, your machine isn't able to tell you that that's a hammered coin, so you've got to dig it. All it's telling you is that that's a low VDI number, and you've told me to discriminate that and give it this type of pitch, so that's what it's doing. So my advice to you guys is to not try to worry too much about discriminating targets based on their VDI numbers, okay? What you really want to be doing is listening out for that target first and foremost, because if it's a clean target but it sounds faint, then chances are it's going to be something good, but it's deep. Rather than, you know, discriminating it out because it's deep, thinking that it might be something that you actually don't want to dig. So it's a very difficult kind of compromise to make, but generally with most of my settings, unless they're made for a very specific type of use, I will always keep the discrimination rather low, and that's because I still want to pick up those scratchy, faint, sort of buzzy signals, and it will be my ears more than the VDI number that tell me whether or not I should dig it or not. And 9 times out of 10, guys, you should dig it and, you know, find out what it is. And it's only by that process that you're really going to learn how to use the machine, what the tones are doing for you, and obviously, you know, if you can get anything more out of the ground that you're on. So it's all very much a sort of learning process, but as you can see, I've adjusted my tones now to accommodate for that 930 pitch, and that 930 pitch you'll hear really nicely on this little Roman grot. There it is. It's a lovely high pitch 930. That to me tells me every time you're digging that, even if it's something like a ring pull or a piece of scrap foil, that's getting dug. And you know, it gives you a bit of confidence to know that that might be something of high conductivity. And then you've got the opposite end of the scale, which is like a nice gold ring. It's got a double beat because it's a ring, so it's giving you that telltale sign that it's a ring or something like that, but it's also coming in at that 541 sort of target range, because if you look at 541, it goes all the way up to 76, so anything 76 and below is going to be falling in that 541 range. Okay, so if I was to run across anything that's iron, it's going to come up in the 202 range. All right, so we're setting up those particular types of sounds depending on the type of sound that we want for each of the particular targets that we've got. But remember, this isn't gospel, it's just a rough guide for you to be able to train your ear into kind of saying, right, that's definitely going to be something good, or that might be iffy, or definitely don't dig that. All right. Okay, so this is where you can be a little bit clever, because although you don't want to discriminate out those targets, let's say 51 and below, because they could be deep signals, what you can actually do is give them a certain sound, so that, for instance, you know, it's not going to be the 930 pitch, but it could be the 541 pitch, and therefore it's telling you that, you know, it's certainly not going to be this high conducting, lovely, great big silver coin that's close to the top, but it's still a good signal and it's worth digging. You haven't discriminated out, it's letting you know that it's in the ground, so let's dig it and let's find out what it is. Okay, so I'll give you a good demonstration of that. If I go over the musket bore, which is here, okay, what you can hear with the musket bore is that it's coming in as a nice high signal, but it's got that 541 type of tone, and that's because it's falling at 69. Okay, and the threshold for the 930 is 76. That's why it's coming in under 541. Now if we move over to, say, let's say the small, very small piece of tin foil, scratchy as it should be, but it's coming in probably about 31. And because 541 starts at 6.1, that would be falling into the 541 target range. Let's go over to, let's say, the gold coin. Well, we know that that's coming in at around sort of 50, between 50 and 55, and falling very much in between the 541 range. Let's go to the Roman grot. Yeah, 81, so that's definitely coming in under 76. The large foil. Well, that's 541. Quite happy with that because it's a mid-tone, so it will give me the option to say, well, it's clean, so I'll dig it, but it's a mid-tone, so it's not going to be a super high conductor like silver or copper or something like that. And then we'll move on to the tiny little hammered coin. Now, that's the thing with hammered coins, is that's a lovely little hammered coin, and I definitely want to find it. But it's coming in at around 60, so it's very similar to the sort of foil range. Now, if I wanted to, I could adjust this here so that it would come under the 930 pitch by adjusting this down to about 61. Let's try that, and then run over the same hammered coin. Try it, just adjust it down to 60. You see how it's got that nice 930 bit now? It's sort of rolling between 541 and 930. So that's telling me that essentially there's definitely something there. It could be deep or it could be small, but it's telling me definitely to dig it, because I've told the detector that I want to give it that nice high tone because it's got those types of VDI numbers. Now, if we run over the same hammered coin higher, okay, that's coming in at around 63. So again, it's, although it's deeper, it's jumping around quite a lot, and as you can hear, it's quite scratchy. But because we've got it set to 60 now, anything above 60 is going to give me that high tone, and I've trained my ear to know that anything over 60, we're digging it. Okay, so that's kind of how you can be a little bit clever with your discrimination tone breaks. Again, this is very much a personal thing. You can adjust them however you like them, but this is something that I do on every preset that I make, so that I can make sure that, you know, what I'm going over potentially would be a good target. So there's the big foil. Coming in at 67 to 69. So okay, it's a big foil, it's quite a large item. Let's adjust it to 69 now. Let's say I don't want to dig large foil in the sense that it's going to give me that nice high tone, and it means I'm definitely going to be digging it. So let's change it to 69 on the threshold and go over it again. There you go, it's instantly changed to the 541 setting. All right, I'm still going to be digging 541 depending on how it sounds, and I might look at the XY screen, which I absolutely love, by the way, guys. But it's deciding, it's giving you those options to put it in those different segments, so that you can absolutely for sure say, right, I'm digging that, or let's investigate that a little bit further using other methods first. And that could mean trying different programs or adjusting the settings on the machine and going from there. So to be fair, based on the targets I've got, Roman coin high. Let's go for the ring pull. Well, that's high. I mean, it's pretty high. So the break for that is about 71 to 72. So I could, if I wanted to, adjust this up to 72. There you go. So it's now giving me a bounce between 541 tone and 930. And if I go back to the little hammered coin, well, that's still a solid 541. I'm happy with that. Absolutely happy with that. Roman coin, ring pull, gold ring, nice solid mid-tone. Let's go for the small tiny bit of foil. Really scratchy, very low. And then the hammered coin next to the nail. So the nail's actually right on top of that hammered coin now. You can tell how difficult it is to single out that one. And then let's go over the musket ball. There we go. So the musket ball is coming in at about 72, and because we've changed that tone break to about 72, 73, it's now coming in under that 930 tone break. So yeah, I mean, look, I'm quite tempted to keep it at that. I might tweak it a little bit as I'm going through the field and I find some of the random items that you find in a field, not necessarily the things that we've taken. But that's kind of a rough, you know, idea as to how I set up my discrimination and the expert settings and how it kind of works on the Deus machine as well. So yeah, the last thing we've got to do is just a little bit of ground balancing. Ground balancing, it's a different button here. You've got different options. You can do manual, pumping, on the beach, or tracking. I mean, look guys, there's lots and lots of different videos out there about ground balancing, and it all very much depends on your type of ground. But you know, what I would say to you, and what I generally try and do with ground balancing, is I just put it onto manual, and then I start at about 90 with none of the little red blocks. I start at 90, and then as I'm swinging, I'm keeping an eye on this thing up here, and I'm just seeing what it's doing. And if I need to adjust it down, which is generally usually adjusting it down, I just adjust it down so that when I'm swinging, I'm not getting this sort of back feedback and the little blips and blops like you can hear now when the coil's not moving. And when you've got your ground balance sorted, it really does make a huge difference in terms of depth and stuff as well. So it's definitely worth doing, guys. Okay. Okay, and there we have it, guys. Today we have made a nice little custom program. Hopefully it's going to be good enough for you to go out in the fields and you know, see what you can find. It's absolutely perfect conditions today to do some detecting. I mean, even the weather's sort of blessed us and the sun's come out. But yeah, there it is. I mean, I really hope that this has helped some of you guys that maybe are new to the Deus, or even if you've been a little bit afraid to adjust some of the settings because you weren't quite sure what they was, you know, were going to do. Yeah, I hope this has helped you. But as I say, it's important that this setting that we've made today, it's very much a setting for this type of field. So the idea is I want everybody to kind of go out and start adjusting it to their type of field, because then you're going to really boost your chances of finding as much as you possibly can, given the time that you've got to find it in. And yeah, that's it. So I really hope you've enjoyed the video today, guys. I know it's a bit of a long one and it's a bit of a slog. Certainly so again, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and hopefully we'll get testing the program soon. I'll do a video in this very field before he seeds it of what we find and how it performs. So again, thank you very much, guys. Thanks for watching.